I am Serena Vale, and I am 11 years old. That was my age the last time my life felt predictable. It was the last time I believed that adults always knew what they were doing, that parents left and returned as promised, and that home was something stable instead of fragile. I did not know that one ordinary morning, quiet, almost forgettable, would become the dividing line between childhood and survival. I did not know that a single sentence, spoken softly and without hesitation, could strip away innocence faster than any scream ever could. Before I go any further, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this reach people who are quietly carrying pain they never chose, and your support helps those voices feel less alone. My mother, Maribel Vale, said she was going to Europe for just 1 month. She smiled when she said it, like the words were harmless, like they didn't carry weight or consequence. Her tone was casual, almost cheerful, the way people talk about short errands or quick visits. She made it sound temporary, manageable, normal. I believed her because I had no reason not to. When you're a child, you trust the voice that raised you, even when something inside you feels uncertain. That morning, the house was already alive before I woke up. Drawers opened and closed with purpose. Suitcases scraped gently across the floor. Zippers zipped, paused, and zipped again. Shoes were lined up neatly by the front door, polished and ready. The air felt busy but distant, like something important was happening that didn't involve me. I stood in the hallway, watching adults move around with focus and excitement, their conversations light and filled with plans I didn't understand. The kitchen counter was covered with papers, travel documents folded neatly, stacked with intention. Passports lay beside them, placed carefully, like they mattered. Everything was prepared. Everything was planned. Except me. No one checked the fridge. No one asked about meals. No one mentioned school schedules or emergencies. No one asked who would look after me. I followed my mother into the living room, my socks whispering against the floor. She was folding clothes into her suitcase, calm and unhurried. Her perfume filled the air, something expensive and floral, a scent that would linger long after she was gone. I watched her hands move with certainty, folding outfits she had chosen for herself. She looked relaxed. She looked happy. She finally noticed me standing there. She knelt down in front of me, just briefly, like it was something she had remembered to do. Her smile was warm, practiced, reassuring. She kissed my forehead softly. Then she placed $7 into my hand. The bill felt thin, almost weightless, like it could disappear if I wasn't careful. "You're old enough to manage," she said. That was all. No instructions. No warnings. No concern. Just a statement delivered with confidence, like responsibility was a gift she was generously handing me. I nodded because that's what I always did. I didn't question her. I didn't ask what I was supposed to manage or how. I didn't ask what would happen if I couldn't. Children don't ask those questions when trust still exists. The front door closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. The lock clicked. The car engine started. I stood by the window, watching the taillights disappear down the street. I waited for hesitation. For a sudden stop. For regret. None came. At first, I believed she would return quickly. I told myself it was just a few weeks. I counted days on a small calendar taped above my desk. I crossed each one off carefully, telling myself this was proof of independence, that she trusted me because I was capable. I repeated that idea like a prayer. By the third day, the food was almost gone. I opened the fridge slowly, hoping something new might appear. It didn't. A few leftovers. Some expired milk. A jar of sauce. I started rationing immediately, even though no one taught me how. I ate less during the day so I could eat later at night. I saved half of my school lunch and wrapped it tightly in napkins, hiding it in my backpack like it was something shameful. Hunger became a constant presence, dull but persistent. I learned how to ignore it. I drank water to fill the space. I chewed slowly to make food last longer. I convinced myself this was temporary. Nights were worse. The house felt enormous once the sun went down. Sounds traveled differently. Every creak made my heart jump. I slept with the lights on because darkness made the silence louder. I listened for keys at the door, for footsteps, for any sign that this was all a mistake. Nothing came. At school, I learned how to act normal. Teachers asked why I looked tired. I smiled and said I was fine. Classmates talked about dinner plans and weekend outings. I nodded along. I learned how to hide hunger behind politeness. I learned how to laugh when expected. I learned how to disappear without leaving. Each day felt longer than the last. What hurt more than the hunger or the fear was knowing this wasn't accidental. My mother planned her trip. She booked flights. She packed carefully. She chose herself, and she did it without hesitation. I was old enough to understand one painful truth. I was not her priority. By the second week, survival became routine. I stopped hoping for rescue. I stopped checking the door constantly. I started conserving everything: food, electricity, energy. I turned off lights. I stayed quiet. I learned how to exist without being seen. One evening, I gathered the courage to call Aunt Leora, my mother's friend. My hands shook while dialing. I tried to explain gently, carefully, afraid of sounding dramatic. I told her my mom hadn't come back yet. That I was alone. That something felt wrong. She laughed. She said my mother would never abandon her child. She said I was exaggerating. She told me to stop worrying. The call ended quickly, leaving me with a dial tone and a tight chest. After that, I stopped reaching out. At school, adults began watching me more closely. Their questions came softly. Was everything okay at home? Was I eating enough? Sleeping well? I lied every time. Telling the truth felt too dangerous. Being dismissed once taught me a brutal lesson. Disbelief hurts more than hunger. Then one night, the lights went out. The house went dark suddenly, without warning. Panic surged. I froze, unsure what mistake I had made. After a few minutes, the power returned weakly. While searching for a candle, I noticed an envelope tucked behind some papers on the counter. Inside were printed bank statements. Travel expenses. Hotel stays in Milan. Dining charges in Paris. Shopping receipts in Madrid. The amounts were large. Consistent. Planned. Money had never been missing. It had simply been spent elsewhere. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by proof I never wanted to see. Every page told the same story. Resources existed. Care did not. The absence was deliberate. That night, hope disappeared quietly. I stopped waiting. I started understanding. And with that understanding, something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. I did not mark the day my mother returned on the calendar because by then, I had stopped counting. Days had lost their shape. They blended into one another, measured not by dates but by survival, by how much food remained, by how long the house stayed quiet, by how deeply I learned to live without expecting anything. Time passed whether I acknowledged it or not, and eventually it passed without her. The early weeks were the hardest because hope still existed. Hope is cruel when it refuses to die quickly. Every night, I imagined the sound of keys turning in the lock. Every morning, I woke with the faint belief that today would be different. That belief kept hurting me so slowly, without realizing it, I began to let it go. By the third week, my body had changed. My clothes hung looser. My face looked sharper in the mirror, my eyes larger, darker. Hunger was no longer loud. It had become familiar. I moved carefully, conserving energy. I learned how to make myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, even when I was alone. The house stopped feeling like a home. It became a structure I occupied, nothing more. Rooms lost their meaning. The living room was no longer where we sat together. The kitchen was no longer where meals happened. Everything felt hollow, like a set after the actors had left. I began to rely on routines because routines don't abandon you. Wake up early. Wash quickly. Dress neatly. Lock the door. Smile at school. Save food. Come home quietly. At school, I perfected invisibility. Teachers noticed I was thinner, quieter, more withdrawn, but I answered every question exactly as expected. I said I was fine so convincingly that they stopped asking. My performance became flawless because it had to be. The truth felt dangerous. I had already learned that people didn't believe children when the story made adults uncomfortable. When the refrigerator finally emptied completely, panic arrived quietly instead of violently. I stood in front of the open door for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I closed it, sat down, and thought. I didn't cry. Crying felt wasteful. I needed solutions. I began doing small jobs for neighbors without explaining why. Carrying groceries. Watering plants. Cleaning garages. I never asked for much, just enough to buy bread, rice, instant noodles. I stretched everything. I learned how to cook simple meals, how to make food last, how to pretend I wasn't hungry when my stomach twisted. Independence arrived before I understood what it meant. Nights were still difficult. Silence presses harder in the dark. I slept lightly, always alert, always listening. Fear no longer screamed, it whispered. It stayed with me constantly, shaping how I moved, how I thought, how I trusted no one. Then one afternoon the door opened. Laughter filled the house before I could process the sound. Rolling luggage scraped across the floor. Voices overlapped, excited, careless, full. The house felt invaded by noise after so much stillness. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching strangers walk into my life wearing familiar faces. My mother looked rested. Happy. Her skin glowed like someone who had enjoyed herself. She talked loudly about flights, food, places she loved. Her partner, Jonah Reed, followed behind her, laughing, adding details, already unpacking memories I was never part of. Neither of them noticed me at first. When they did, the reaction was brief and unsettlingly casual. "Oh," my mother said, scanning me quickly. "You look thinner." It wasn't concern. It was observation. Jonah frowned slightly, like he was confused. "Did you forget to eat?" he asked, almost joking. My mother laughed. I probably spoiled her independence too much. That was it. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of time. They moved past me, unpacking souvenirs, placing gifts on the table for people who weren't there. They spoke over me, around me, as if my presence was optional. I stood quietly, my face forming a small, controlled smile that felt strange on my lips. It surprised me how easily it appeared. That smile wasn't forgiveness. It was distance. I realized then that confronting them would change nothing. They didn't see what they had done because they didn't want to. My pain didn't interrupt their happiness. My absence hadn't disrupted their lives. Understanding that gave me clarity instead of anger. I stopped trying to be heard. From that day on, I watched instead. I paid attention to how my mother dismissed struggles with jokes. How Jonah brushed off responsibility with humor. How both of them treated my resilience as proof that nothing serious had happened. They congratulated themselves for raising a strong child, never questioning why I had to be strong in the first place. Years passed that way. I grew quieter, more observant, more careful. I learned how to exist alongside people without relying on them. I saved money secretly. I kept records, small notes, dates, observations. Not because I planned revenge, but because documentation made me feel safe. Truth feels powerful when it's written down. They underestimated me constantly. That became my advantage. By the time I was 15, I had stopped expecting care. I cooked for myself. I managed my school responsibilities alone. I planned for the future silently. I didn't argue. I didn't demand. I didn't ask. I let them believe everything was fine because their comfort depended on it. And comfort, I learned, can blind people completely. They spoke freely around me, unaware that I was listening. Financial conversations, travel plans, complaints about responsibility. I absorbed everything quietly, storing it away without emotion. I was no longer reacting, I was learning. By 17, something inside me had settled into certainty. I would leave. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Not with confrontation. I would leave prepared. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A school counselor invited me into her office one afternoon, casually, gently. She asked about my plans after graduation. About home. About support. Her voice didn't carry suspicion or judgment, just curiosity. For the first time, I didn't deflect. I spoke slowly, carefully, choosing words like they mattered. I told her about being left alone. About weeks without food. About survival disguised as independence. I shared documents I had kept hidden, bank statements, notes, dates. She listened. Really listened. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. She told me what I had experienced wasn't just neglect. It was illegal. That abandonment paired with deliberate spending elsewhere carried consequences. That my experience wasn't something I had imagined or exaggerated. For the first time, my story existed outside of me. And that changed everything. I felt something unfamiliar then, not anger, not relief, but power. Quiet, steady power. The kind that comes from being believed. I took the next steps carefully. I organized everything. I followed instructions exactly. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I let facts speak. Documentation became my language. When the letter finally arrived at the house, everything shifted. My mother's hands shook as she read it. Jonah's voice rose in anger, then dropped into fear. They accused me of betrayal, of exaggeration, of cruelty. They asked why I would do this to them. I looked at them calmly. "You did it to me first," I said. The room went silent. For the first time, they had no control. And for the first time, I understood something deeply and permanently. Justice doesn't require rage. Sometimes it only requires patience. The aftermath did not arrive all at once. It came in stages, quiet and procedural, nothing like the dramatic confrontations people imagine when they hear stories like mine. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no emotional confessions meant to fix years of damage. What followed was colder than that. It was reality catching up. Once the process began, everything moved slower than I expected. Authorities do not rush when truth is involved. They verify. They cross-check. They confirm. Every document I had saved over the years mattered now. Every note, every date, every record of absence and spending became a thread in a story that could no longer be dismissed or laughed away. My mother tried denial first. She said there must have been misunderstandings. She insisted I had exaggerated. She claimed she believed someone else was checking on me. None of those claims held up. There were no phone records, no care arrangements, no emergency plans, only proof that she had planned enjoyment carefully while leaving responsibility behind. Jonah tried anger. He accused me of ingratitude. He said I was trying to destroy the family. He framed himself as the victim of a vindictive child who didn't appreciate independence. His voice grew louder the more the facts stayed silent. Anger did not help him. It only exposed how unprepared he was for accountability. What surprised me most was how detached I felt through it all. I had imagined that facing them would bring emotion back, that something would crack open inside me. It didn't. I felt steady, focused, like someone finishing a task that had taken years to prepare for. The house changed after that. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I entered a room. Doors closed more often. Laughter disappeared. Tension replaced comfort. The people who once dismissed my pain now avoided my presence, unsure how to look at me. They were experiencing discomfort for the first time. I had lived inside it for years. Eventually, outcomes followed. Financial consequences, legal restrictions, mandatory counseling, supervision. The details were handled by people whose job it was to handle them. I didn't argue for harsher punishment. I didn't ask for sympathy. I asked for distance. Distance was granted. Leaving did not feel dramatic. There was no goodbye speech. No last look around the room. I packed quietly, efficiently, the way I had learned to do everything. The house no longer felt like something I was leaving behind. It felt like something I had already outgrown. Stepping outside felt lighter than I expected. Not joyful, just calm, like setting down something heavy you didn't realize you were still carrying. Freedom didn't come instantly. Independence doesn't erase memory. It changes how memory sits inside you. The first months on my own were strange. Silence no longer felt threatening, but it still felt familiar. I learned how to exist without bracing myself. That took time. I focused on structure, education, work, routine. Predictability became comfort instead of a survival tool. I surrounded myself with people who didn't require me to prove my worth through endurance. People who noticed when something was wrong. People who didn't confuse neglect with strength. Healing did not arrive as a single moment. It came quietly through repetition, through meals eaten without fear, through sleep that lasted through the night, through days where hunger was a memory instead of a strategy. Sometimes reminders appeared unexpectedly. A crumpled bill on the sidewalk, coins abandoned near a vending machine, small amounts of money that meant nothing to most people. Those moments paused me briefly. They reminded me of where everything began, of how little it took to change the direction of a life. But I didn't feel bitterness anymore. That small amount once represented abandonment. Now it represents endurance. It reminds me that survival taught me discipline. That silence taught me observation. That loneliness taught me clarity. I learned that independence is not being left alone. It is having choices. It is having control. It is knowing that your safety does not depend on someone else's mood, priorities, or convenience. I never returned. Not out of spite. Out of understanding. Some distances are not punishments. They are protections. Occasionally, I wonder who I would have been if none of this had happened. If care had been consistent. If childhood had been uninterrupted. That curiosity no longer hurts. It simply exists. The person I became is not broken. She is shaped. What I lost early, I rebuilt intentionally. And what I built, no one can take away. If you've ever been left to survive when you should have been cared for, you're not weak for walking away. You're not cruel for choosing distance. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining your pain to people who benefited from ignoring it. If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you think.